Every time the United States does a military strike on a different country, mostly the approval ratings of the sitting president have gone up in the past. But it seems like this isn't the case with Donald Trump. And it appears like the incumbent leader is aware of this exception. Ahead of the crucial midterm elections, American President Trump has claimed that he would be impeached if the Republicans fail to win the upcoming polls. Let's give you a context. While addressing House Republicans at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., Trump urged his party to stick together and fight for what he called 12 months of unprecedented success.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
Trump's comments come at a time when several polls have suggested that his approval ratings have stagnated or have not seen much of a hike, especially after the Venezuela strikes. Trump, who calls these polls rigged, also complained about his polling numbers during this address.
All right, team. Dr. John back behind the mic. Trump's worst fear, a Democratic-controlled House pursuing a third impeachment, is becoming a concrete political reality. What he admitted kept him up at night is now unfolding across multiple fronts, and it's more significant than any cable news outrage or late-night joke. Let that sink in for a moment, because it's genuinely extraordinary when you stop and think about it. The President of the United States, a man who has built his entire political identity around projecting strength and invincibility, who has survived scandals that would have destroyed any other politician in American history, who has been impeached not once, but twice, and walked away both times, actually named his own vulnerability out loud. He told the American people that a Democratic House pursuing impeachment again was his most dreaded political outcome. That kind of self-awareness is rare from any president.
Now, according to a survey conducted by The Economist and YouGov between 2nd and 5th January this year, Trump's approval rating stood at 39%, which is unchanged from its last survey. Another poll conducted by Reuters Ipsos between 4th and 5th of January showed a 3% uptick in Trump's approval ratings to 42%. Since October last year, Trump's approval ratings have been in the early 40s or below. During the address, Trump even floated the idea of canceling future American elections. However, he was quick to insist that he was not calling for such a move and that his remarks were a critique of Democrats rather than a proposal. During an Oval Office meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last year, Trump had voiced support for Ukraine's ban on elections under martial law. And back then, Trump had quipped that it would be a good thing if United States were at war 3.5 years into his second term, and if he could do away with elections. However, there is no precedent for postponing elections in the United States federal law. In fact, the law leaves no room for a president to cancel or even postpone congressional polls.
But from Trump, it's practically unprecedented. And now, exactly what he feared most is unfolding in real time, not from one direction, not from a single grievance that might fade away, but from multiple angles simultaneously, each generating its own distinct pressure on a presidency that's already carrying the weight of an unprecedented legal and political history. Back in the latter months of the previous year, something significant happened on Capitol Hill that set the stage for everything we're watching today. A formal document was introduced, a resolution with a number that would become familiar to anyone following these proceedings closely. And its language was about as harsh as official legislative wording can possibly get. It branded the president as an abuser of presidential power.
American presidential elections have kept their dates even at the height of the Civil War, the Spanish flu outbreak, and the more recent COVID outbreak. Now, with an eye on the midterm elections in November, can Donald Trump really turn the tide? That's the big question that we're asking. Let me go across to Mr. Greg Swenson. He is chairman of the Republicans Overseas UK. He's joining us live on the broadcast from Florida. Greg, good evening. Welcome to WION. I want to start by asking you, of course, the Venezuelan strikes would have made the Republican Party and Donald Trump think that perhaps the approval ratings will see a hike. That clearly hasn't happened.
Yeah, and it probably will happen, and it all depends on the economy and affordability. That's the big issue. So, while President Trump has had great successes with foreign policy and with this recent intervention in Venezuela as well as Iran last summer, the American voter doesn't really care that much about foreign policy. So I think he's doing the right thing in looking after American interests and Western interests around the world.
Someone who, if left in office, would continue to promote violence, engender hate, undermine democratic institutions, and ultimately dissolve the republic itself. That's not subtle criticism. That's not diplomatic language crafted to soften the blow. That's a direct accusation that the president represents an existential threat to American democracy, and it was put on the official congressional record for everyone to see. The resolution laid out fresh articles of impeachment meant to be exhibited to the Senate if the House were to actually pass it. Now, let's be honest about the mechanics here, because understanding how this process actually works is essential to understanding the current moment. Any single member of the House of Representatives can file an impeachment resolution entirely on their own.
But I think he's got to change and refocus back on domestic issues and the economy. If he does that, his numbers will clearly go up. I don't have any problem with that. Remember, Ronald Reagan was polling at 35 in early January, or early 1983. And a year and a half later, he won 49 states in arguably the greatest landslide in American electoral history. So, it's a little early, but I do agree that the president is not polling high enough right now to bring Republicans a big victory in the midterms, but that can change a lot. I mean, 9 months, 10 months in electoral politics is a long time.
Sure, this is a long time. And, this is what I was coming to next, Greg. The fact that the president isn't significantly or largely talking about the affordability crisis, the Medicaid cut that has happened, and those are the issues that actually plague the voters. That's what they're concerned about, because, of course, we all know that a lot of MAGA voters do not support such military strikes out of the country. So why isn't the president talking about all of these issues?
Without needing a single other vote, without committee approval, without any institutional support whatsoever. The filing itself is the easiest part of the process, the first step that requires nothing more than a member willing to put their name on a document. But moving that resolution through committee, onto the floor, and through an actual majority vote requires building genuine coalition support, something that's genuinely difficult in a closely divided chamber where every vote matters. So when you see headlines about new impeachment resolutions being introduced, it's worth remembering that this is really just the beginning of a much longer and much harder journey that most resolutions never complete. But here's the crucial context that makes this moment different from all the impeachment talk we've heard before.
Yeah, it's a great question, Shreya. I think what the president did pivot right after the November elections of 2 months ago, when you saw, some fairly, I wouldn't say significant, but comfortable wins by the Democrats. They were in blue states that they would have won anyway, but they won with bigger margins than was expected. And so I think right after those off-year elections in early November, you saw the president, as well as the members of his cabinet, especially the Treasury Secretary, really pivot toward affordability and talking about the economy. But sometimes the real world gets in the way. And I think this whole issue with Venezuela was very timely and it was urgent. And so, that in a perfect world, he could have stayed on point and just talked about domestic issues. And the news in the economy, by the way, is really positive. So I think this will, if he can get this, foreign policy stuff behind him over the next few weeks and really pivot again back to the economy and affordability, it will favor him because the numbers are really positive. You don't hear that from the mainstream media here in the US.
The specific triggers, the actual events that are driving these new efforts have evolved significantly. They're not just recycling the same old grievances from 2019 or 2021. New controversies have emerged, new alleged offenses have been documented, and new lawmakers have stepped forward to champion different causes. One representative in particular has become almost a one-man impeachment machine, returning to the House floor again and again with new pledges, new resolutions, new warnings that he's about to introduce articles within a certain time frame. His track record on this issue is remarkable for its consistency. He's been promising impeachment for months, actually filed resolutions that are now part of the official congressional record, and shows no signs of backing down, regardless of whether any single effort ever gains enough momentum to reach a full floor vote. This particular congressman, who has become the face of the House impeachment push, has a history that's worth understanding because it tells you something important about how seriously to take his current promises. He's made variations of this exact pledge multiple times throughout the current congressional session. He's promised articles within 30 days at a rally. He's warned the president on the House floor about additional charges if certain conduct continued. He's actually filed resolutions that are now part of the official record. So when he stands up in the middle of the year and says he'll introduce new articles within weeks, the honest way to frame that is as part of a consistent, ongoing pattern of impeachment advocacy from one of the House's most persistent institutional critics, not as a brand new, unprecedented escalation that's guaranteed to result in a completed vote. That distinction matters because it helps us separate genuine momentum from repeated rhetorical pressure. Now, let's talk about exactly what's driving this latest push, because the substance matters as much as the process. The most recent impeachment promise is built around accusations involving immigration enforcement operations and fatal shootings connected to those operations. The congressman who's leading this charge is arguing that the administration failed to ensure proper accountability for these incidents, and he's suggesting there may have been cover-ups inside federal investigations into what happened. These are serious allegations that go beyond typical political disagreements about policy. They're accusations that the administration has actively obstructed justice, that it has protected its own people from consequences, that it has hidden the truth from the American public about deadly encounters involving federal law enforcement. If those allegations are true, they represent exactly the kind of high crimes and misdemeanors the Constitution envisioned when it created the impeachment mechanism. The timing of this push is also significant because it's happening against the backdrop of broader political dynamics that amplify its impact. The president's own approval ratings have been under pressure from multiple directions. The economy has been sending mixed signals that leave voters uncertain about the future. International conflicts have been demanding attention and resources that might otherwise be focused on domestic priorities. And the midterm elections are looming on the horizon, creating an environment where every political move carries extra weight because the control of Congress itself is at stake. In that context, impeachment isn't just a legal process. It's a political weapon that can shape the entire electoral landscape by defining the terms of debate and forcing voters to choose sides on fundamental questions about presidential conduct and accountability. What makes this moment genuinely different from previous impeachment efforts is the accumulation of pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. It's not just one issue driving the conversation. It's several completely separate controversies all generating their own impeachment talk at the same time. You've got the immigration enforcement accountability questions. You've got election integrity concerns tied to presidential rhetoric about fraud. You've got war powers questions connected to ongoing military conflicts. Each of these issues has its own set of lawmakers championing it, its own set of alleged offenses, its own timeline of events that allegedly warrant formal congressional action. And they're all happening at once, creating an environment where the president is constantly defending himself against formal accusations from different angles, making it harder for the White House to control the narrative or focus public attention on any single issue. The president's own history with impeachment makes this moment particularly fraught because he's been down this road before, twice actually, and he knows exactly how damaging the process can be even when it doesn't result in removal. Back in the winter of 2019, the House impeached him on 2 articles, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, tied to his pressure campaign involving Ukraine. The Senate acquitted him the following February. Then in January of the following year, just days before leaving office, the House impeached him again. this time for incitement of insurrection connected to the attack on the Capitol. That made him the first president in American history to be impeached twice. The Senate acquitted him again, though this time 7 Republicans actually crossed over and voted to convict, which was remarkable given how rare it is for any senator to vote against their own party's president in an impeachment trial. Trump knows firsthand what it feels like to face impeachment, to watch the House debate his conduct, to hear senators discuss whether he should be removed from office, to see his name permanently attached to that infamous distinction. He's been very clear that watching Democrats retake the House and go after him a third time is one of his deepest political fears heading into this term. He said it publicly, on the record, in his own words. That admission of vulnerability is itself remarkable because it shows that even someone as seemingly impervious to political damage as Trump recognizes that the constant grind of formal accusations, even without removal, carries a real political toll. Each impeachment effort forces him to spend time and resources on legal defense instead of governing. Each one generates negative headlines that reinforce the image of a presidency perpetually under siege. Each one energizes his opponents while potentially demoralizing his supporters who get tired of watching their champion constantly fighting off accusations. The senator who's been most vocal on the other side of the impeachment equation has also been remarkably consistent. He's made multiple calls for the president's removal across different issues throughout the current year. Earlier in the year, he argued that Trump needed to be removed after threatening military action against Iran, describing the president as completely unstable and perilous at the time, and arguing that the Senate needed to remove a leader willing to threaten what he called ending an entire civilization. More recently, following a prime-time White House address where the president pushed claims about foreign interference in past elections, this same senator publicly declared that Trump must be impeached for undermining and subverting free and fair elections. He went even further, calling for the cabinet and vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment and encouraging organized public resistance if immigration enforcement ever showed up at polling locations. This senator's impeachment argument is built on the claim that the president's rhetoric itself, promoting unproven fraud claims from the official White House podium, represents an attack on democratic norms serious enough to warrant formal congressional action, even without allegations of a specific illegal act tied directly to stealing an election. That's a different kind of impeachment argument than the immigration enforcement accountability questions driving the House effort. It's more about rhetoric and norms than about a specific documented action. And it's worth understanding that distinction rather than lumping every impeachment call into one identical bucket. Critics from across the political spectrum have pointed out that the president still hasn't substantiated his broader claim that widespread fraud actually altered election outcomes, making Markey's argument more about the danger of the rhetoric itself than about concrete evidence of criminal conduct. That distinction matters because it raises fundamental questions about what impeachment is actually for. Is it only for specific illegal acts, documented crimes that can be proven in court? Or does it also cover broader threats to democratic institutions, including presidential rhetoric that undermines public confidence in elections? Reasonable people can disagree about where exactly that line should sit. And that disagreement itself is part of what makes this particular impeachment argument different from the more evidence-heavy accusations tied to immigration enforcement operations or war powers issues. The senator who's pushing this line clearly believes that the rhetoric itself poses a serious enough risk to justify congressional action, while others argue that impeachment should be reserved for cases where specific illegal conduct can be proven. This debate is likely to continue regardless of whether any single impeachment effort ever actually reaches a full vote. The pattern across all of these efforts is itself telling. You've got one lawmaker consistently pushing immigration enforcement accountability as his primary issue, filing resolutions, making floor speeches, promising articles within specific timeframes, You've got another lawmaker focusing on election integrity and presidential rhetoric, arguing that attacks on democratic norms warrant formal congressional action. You've got potential future efforts tied to war powers issues and military conflicts. None of these individual efforts might be enough on their own to generate a full House impeachment vote, let alone the two-thirds Senate majority needed for removal. But together, they create an environment where the president is constantly defending himself against formal accusations from multiple directions, where impeachment is never fully off the table, where every news cycle brings a new pledge or a new resolution that keeps the story alive. This brings us to the bigger picture that connects all of these individual efforts into a single overarching narrative. The president has accumulated an unprecedented collection of legal and political scars over the course of his political career. He's been impeached twice, a distinction no other president shares. He's been convicted on 34 felony fraud counts in Manhattan, a criminal conviction that would have ended any other political career. He's been found civilly liable for sexual abuse in the E. Jean Carroll verdict. He's faced countless investigations, lawsuits, and congressional inquiries across multiple jurisdictions. None of these individual outcomes has removed him from office, and the felony conviction didn't even prevent him from being elected again. But together, they build what a lot of analysts describe as a broader unfitness narrative. The idea that regardless of any single legal outcome, the sheer volume of scandal, conviction, and formal accusations surrounding one presidency is itself extraordinary and unprecedented in American history. The president himself has acknowledged that this accumulation of pressure represents his deepest political fear. He's said it explicitly, on the record in his own words. That admission is remarkable because it shows that even someone who has survived everything thrown at him recognizes that constant legal and political pressure carries a real cost. Every investigation that goes nowhere still generates negative headlines. Every impeachment effort that fails still requires significant time and resources to defend against. Every accusation, no matter how flimsy, reinforces the image of a presidency perpetually under siege. And when the midterms are approaching, when control of Congress is up for grabs, when voters are deciding whether to give the president more power or to impose limits on his authority, that image of constant crisis can have real electoral consequences. The strategic logic driving the impeachment advocates is equally clear. Even knowing that actual removal remains extremely unlikely given the current Senate math, every pledge, every floor speech, every public statement keeps their names attached to the accountability fight. It energizes their base by showing that someone is fighting back against the president. It forces the broader political conversation to keep returning to Trump's conduct rather than letting any single controversy fade quietly into the background. And it creates a record that can be used in future elections, a paper trail showing exactly who stood up to the president and who stayed silent. Whether or not any of these specific efforts ever reach a full vote, the visibility itself accomplishes something politically valuable for the lawmakers pushing it. The timing of all of this pressure is particularly significant because it's happening in the shadow of the midterm elections. Whoever controls the House and Senate after those elections will determine whether any of these impeachment efforts, the immigration enforcement articles that one representative keeps promising, the election rhetoric argument that the senator is pushing, or any future effort tied to ongoing military conflicts, ever actually gets a real chance at passing a full House vote, let alone reaching the two-thirds Senate threshold required for removal. So this isn't just a story about congressional pressure right now. It's a preview of exactly what's at stake in those upcoming elections. Every lawmaker who has spoken out on impeachment is implicitly telling their constituents that this issue matters, that who they send to Congress could determine whether the president faces formal accountability for his actions. The president's strategy for dealing with this pressure has been consistent with his approach to previous crises. He's attacked the motives of his accusers, called them partisan hacks, questioned their integrity, and tried to change the subject to what he considers his accomplishments. But the attack strategy has limitations when the accusations are coming from multiple directions simultaneously, and when some of them involve documented incidents that are difficult to dismiss. When there are allegations of cover-ups and fatal law enforcement encounters, when there are questions about presidential rhetoric on election integrity, when there are concerns about war powers being exercised without proper congressional authorization, dismissing all of it as partisan witch hunts becomes harder to sustain, especially when the accusations are being made in such specific terms by such persistent advocates. The underlying question that drives all of this impeachment activity is whether the president's conduct has crossed a line that requires formal congressional action. Different lawmakers have different answers to that question based on the specific issues they're focused on. For those concerned about immigration enforcement accountability, the line is crossed when the administration fails to ensure proper oversight of law enforcement operations. For those concerned about election integrity, the line is crossed when the president uses his official platform to promote unproven fraud claims that undermine public confidence in the democratic process. For those concerned about war powers, the line is crossed when military action is taken without proper congressional authorization. Each of these represents a different theory of what constitutes impeachable conduct, and each has its own strengths and weaknesses as a legal and political argument. The practical reality of what's happening right now is that no full impeachment vote has passed yet, and Senate removal remains a steep climb given the current math. But the pressure itself, the repeated pledges, the formal resolutions, the growing list of lawmakers speaking out, that's all very real. And it's exactly the kind of sustained political siege that validates the fear Trump admitted to having in the first place. A president can survive any single impeachment effort, and Trump has literally already survived 2 of them. But surviving a vote is different from escaping the political toll that comes with facing accusation after accusation, month after month, across issue after issue. Whether or not any current effort ever gathers enough votes to matter formally, the cumulative weight of constant impeachment pressure is itself the story. And it's exactly the kind of grinding, ongoing battle Trump said he wanted to avoid most. This history of impeachment efforts also matters because it establishes a precedent that future presidents will have to contend with. Once impeachment becomes a routine political tool, once it's used repeatedly against the same president and threatened against future presidents, the bar for what constitutes impeachable conduct inevitably shifts. Actions that might once have been criticized but not formally charged can become grounds for impeachment if enough lawmakers decide the conduct warrants it. That erosion of the impeachment threshold is itself a significant development in American constitutional history, regardless of whether any particular effort succeeds. Future presidents, regardless of party, will have to operate in a political environment where impeachment is always a potential response to controversial actions. The broader political dynamics that are driving this moment are also worth considering because they provide context for understanding why impeachment is happening now across multiple fronts, rather than at some other point in the president's term. The midterm elections are approaching, which means every member of Congress is thinking about their own political future. Some lawmakers see supporting impeachment as a way to energize their base and demonstrate that they're fighting back against the president. Others see opposing impeachment as a way to demonstrate loyalty to the president and avoid primary challenges from the right. The electoral calculations that lawmakers make are as important as their substantive policy disagreements in determining whether impeachment efforts gain traction. And those calculations are constantly evolving as the political landscape shifts. The international dimension of this story is also worth mentioning, because the president's foreign policy decisions have been a source of impeachment-related pressure as well. Concerns about unauthorized military action, particularly in the context of ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, have generated their own set of impeachment calls from lawmakers who believe the president is exceeding his constitutional authority. These concerns intersect with the other impeachment fronts to create an environment where the president is being challenged on domestic policy, foreign policy, and the conduct of his administration simultaneously. That intersection of different issues is what makes the current moment genuinely different from previous impeachment efforts, which tended to focus on single controversies rather than on multiple distinct areas of presidential conduct. The documentation of all of these efforts is itself a remarkable historical record. The resolutions filed, the floor speeches delivered, the public statements made by lawmakers on both sides of the impeachment question, all of it is being preserved for future historians to analyze. The congressional record now contains multiple impeachment resolutions from the current session, each with its own language, its own alleged offenses, its own group of co-sponsors. That record will serve as evidence of just how contentious this period of American political history has been. It will show that a president who had already survived 2 impeachments faced a third wave of impeachment pressure from multiple directions, with lawmakers from different ideological backgrounds all converging on the same basic argument that the president's conduct had crossed a constitutional line. So where does all of this leave us as we watch the story continue to unfold? Trump named his own biggest fear out loud: a Democratic House impeaching him again. And right now, across multiple completely separate fronts, immigration enforcement accountability, election integrity rhetoric, and war powers, concerns tied to ongoing conflicts, that exact scenario is actively unfolding in real time. No full House vote has passed yet, and Senate removal remains a steep, unlikely climb given the current math. But the pressure itself, the repeated pledges, the formal resolutions, the growing list of lawmakers speaking out, that's all very real. And it's exactly the kind of sustained political siege that validates the fear Trump admitted to having in the first place. A president can survive any single impeachment effort, but surviving a vote is different from escaping the political toll that comes with facing accusation after accusation month after month. This story is nowhere near finished, and the next chapter is going to be even more dramatic.